We're going to look at Eat Me by Patience Agbabi, a wonderful poem, a really vivid, gruesome modern poem, often students' favourite. There's a really interesting story on face value, but I think also there's a lot of depth to the poem which sometimes goes unnoticed, so it's a really good poem to make yourself stand out by understanding the complexities of it and the nuances of it. So here we go. So the poem is a dramatic monologue, which means that it is narrated by a character that the poet has invented. It's important to recognise that this is not Patience Agbabi's voice, because otherwise she would have just confessed to murder, wouldn't she? So this is a character she's invented, and it's a dramatic monologue. And it's a story about a fat fetiship, or adipophiliac, I think they're called properly. So a male partner who gets sexual gratification out of feeding his lover food until they become really obese. But that's the surface level meaning. There's a lot more there about body image, about power, and about the connection between sort of sex and religion, and body and sex as well. So let's have a look at the poem. So it's written in tercets, so 3-line stanzas. So you might want to think about how that has an impact on meaning. So it reminds me of when Princess Diana famously said there were 3 of us in this marriage, referring to herself, Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles. So maybe Agbabi, or the poetic voice, is referring to herself, her male lover, and also the food, or the issue that stands between them. And the other thing that's happening, as well as the tercets, is enjambment, almost all the way through the poem. The meaning runs from one line into another: homemade, a candle for each stone in weight. And the combination of these 2 things, firstly, really propel the poem forward through regular rhythm. And they give it pace, and they give it a kind of impetus. So that makes it seem like, along with the combination of iambic tetrameter, so most of the way through, the poem is written in iambic tetrameter, and that gives it a really regular rhythm. So that's 4 stressed beats to a line, and it really gives a sense that this is a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, which goes with the idea of dramatic monologue. This person really wants to tell their story. They have something to say. So it kind of makes it political, doesn't it? They have a point to make about power. So we start with when I hit 30. So hit there is interesting because there's a double meaning there. It suggests a target. So they were both aiming for her to get to 30. The word hit, of course, has kind of connotations underneath of violence, as well as hitting a target. And I think it's euphemistic as well, the use of the word 30. So is it 30 years of age, or is it 30 stone in weight? And coincidentally, if you think about BMI, body mass index, BMI is the point where people are started to be considered obese. So it's suggesting straight away that she's significantly overweight. And then all the way through, as I mentioned, to propel that rhythm forward, you get a lot of half rhyme, as well as perfect rhyme. So half rhyme is when you get some of the sounds in a word matching, but not all of them. So cake and made, you've got half rhyme there because there's the A sound, but the consonant sounds at the end don't match. And even made and weight, you've got the same. So you've got half rhyme all the way through, which propels that rhythm forward at a pace. There's an important story here to tell. It makes it all purposeful, the combination of these things. Okay, so then we've got a description of the cake. The icing was white, but the letters were pink. Now, if you think about those 2 colours, stereotypically, they are related to innocence, and they are related to kind of girlishness. So at first, the poetic voice seems to kind of embrace her childlike qualities. And this is further exacerbated by the intertextual reference we have here to Alice in Wonderland. I'll just put Alice, but Alice in Wonderland. So eat me. In Alice in Wonderland, there is a cake which Alice, the little girl in the story, has to eat to make herself bigger. And then there's a drink she has to drink to make herself smaller. And because she's made herself bigger, it allows her passageway to kind of different parts of the world that she's in. So it's almost like this eating and becoming more and more obese at the behest of her partner is a rite of passage. So it's like a trial that she has to undergo in order to gain power. And I ate, did what I was told. So to an extent here, she's quite compliant, but, and this is one of those nuances I was talking about, that didn't even taste it, suggests almost that she's not entirely consensual with what's going on. Yes, I ate the cake because he wanted me to, but I wasn't entirely consenting. I refused to taste. So there's an interesting sense there that she's kind of started to rebel. And here again, we've got some of those half rhymes. We've got some assonance here. Walk, broad, and juggernauts, if you listen, have all got the same vowel sound. So that's assonance, isn't it? Which is propelling that rhythm forward. And that sound or is quite sensual. It gives it a kind of smooth, almost sexualized tone to it. Then he asked me to get up and walk round the bed so he could watch my broad belly wobble, hips judder like a juggernaut. And we've got alliteration there, and that carries on into the next sounder of this B sound, broad belly wobble, bigger, better, big girls, burrow. So you've got there this alliteration. And again, that's quite a sensual sort of sound. It really exaggerates the size of her and the amount of flesh there is. So if I put exaggerates her, fulsome, flesh. And there's a kind of bouncy rhythm to that with the tetrameter, isn't there? That suggests a lightness, a kind of embracing of this by her, as well as a desire for it by him. Then we've also got hips judder like a juggernaut. So we've got a simile here to describe what she looks like when she's moving. He's kind of invited her to get up and do an almost ritual dance for him. And judder like a juggernaut is almost comic, because it's hard not to giggle at those kind of sounds and imagine her wobbling. Juggernaut, though, this simile here of juggernaut gives a sense of enormous power. She's like a huge truck kind of passing through the bedroom. But also, you might remember if you did Jekyll and Hyde, that juggernaut is also the name of a demon in Indian culture, I think it is. So in one way it's comic, but in another way it's demonic. So again, you've got the outer surface meaning that most people get to, that she looks a bit silly and she's self-conscious because she's wobbling, but also there's a real sense of power there, of her having a real forceful, almost demonic power. And then we go on and him talking now in his voice. So this is italicized to show that within this dramatic monologue, we've got a second voice. The bigger the better, he'd say. I like big girls, soft girls, girls I can burrow inside. Notice his use of the word girl rather than woman. So there is a real reductive quality to the way he treats her, which is ironic, isn't it? Because he's trying to make her bigger but also keep her small at the same time. And he talks about burrowing inside her. So there's obviously a sexual connotation there, but it's also animalistic. Like he's a kind of maggot trying to burrow inside her, or a cub. Animalistic. It's hard to talk and spell correctly at the same time. So he's almost kind of cub-like, burrowing in her like she's his nest. And all of this sort of goes together to make her seem quite fertile. And then he says, she says, we're back to the poetic voice now of the woman, I was his jacuzzi. Now, a jacuzzi is a very modern reference, and we associate it with kind of excess and sexual pleasure. So it's one of those kind of hot, bubbly baths that you might sit in, and quite often in films, lovers sort of sitting them together. But he was my cook. My only pleasure was the rush of fast food. His pleasure to watch me swell like forbidden fruit. So again, we've got this idea of her being kind of fertile and bountiful. She's really powerful in her womanliness. And like forbidden fruit, obviously, is a biblical illusion in which we're thinking about the fact that she is like Eve. So it makes you think of the fall of man. She's now getting more powerful, isn't she? Because it's Eve who persuades Adam to eat the forbidden fruit. Or a beach whale on a kingside bed craving a wave. I was a tidal wave of flesh. So again, this metaphor really suggests her growing power. And now we get a very different rhythm in this stanza. Too fat to leave. Too fat to buy a full pint of milk. Too fat to use fat. Too fat. So we've got anaphora here, that repeated phrase. And it's a real kind of climactic moment, which is shown by the repeat of that phrase, because she's reached a certain weight. And she's having to really think about what that means, what she's now too big to do, but what she can use her size for. And she's deciding that she's too fat to be called chubby, cuddly, big built. Now, these are all euphemisms for being overweight, and they're often used to kind of soften the effect. You know, you might say to a child, oh, you're getting a little bit chubby there. So after this unusual stanza where she seems to change her voice slightly and assess what all of this means, there's a real shift in tone here. So now we move her into almost having a kind of godlike status. The day I hit 39, so we've got that word hit again. So there's kind of a patterning here going on. And 39 is when you become, in terms of BMI, morbidly obese now. So she's kind of moving up that scale in terms of her size. And now I allowed him to stroke my globe of a cheek. So the word allowed, obviously the use of that verb suggests she now has control. And globe makes you think that she is almost like a planet, not so much in size, but in terms of control. So she's becoming godlike. And this is further compounded, I think, by the idea of he's now pouring olive oil down her throat. And this is something that you might call libation. It's the offering of a liquid to a god, and was a common kind of way of showing the gods courtesy or sacrifice, if you like. So he's sort of worshipping her now, and there's a real shift in tone to her being more powerful. Soon you'll be 40, and how could I not roll over on top? So here she's almost kind of asking the reader for compliance in what she's doing, and then you get this caesura. Note that there are caesuras all the way through, which sort of push that rhythm forward and keep it as if she's telling a story that's quite exciting and purposeful. And we then get, I drowned his dying sentence out. So a really shocking image for the reader. And here as well is another religious reference. She leaves him for 6 hours that felt like a week. So the idea of 6 hours and a week perhaps might make you think of the 6 days of the week in which God created earth and everything that lives on it. And I just want to jump back to something earlier in the poem as well, while we're thinking about her power. She talks about being his breadfruit. Now, breadfruit is something that was really commonly associated with Tahiti, which was a colony of the British Empire, and considered one of the most far-flung places of it. And there is a colonial sense to this poem as well. Here he appears to be kind of colonising her, and also, but by the end of the poem, she seems to be trying to wrest back that power. Wrest means kind of grab, and it's spelt like this, with a W at the front. So we've got this religious reference at the end where she's wresting back this power, and then we've got this dark humour where he's got nothing left to say. His eyes are just bulging with greed, and it seems as if she's about to eat him. So this wonderful dramatic monologue where she regains her power at the end.